Hello Seekers, welcome to my channel. My name is John Crane Wellesby and I'm a Catholic theologian and content creator. Today we're going to be talking about the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. I'll be using a tool called Accordance Bible Software. I'm not sponsored by Accordance, but I am a software guy and I think it's really cool. So that's what we'll be looking at. This video is my final assignment for my THL 408 Introduction to Old Testament subject at St. Mark's National Theological Centre here in Canberra, Australia. So let's begin. We'll start by having a look at some maps. Actually, let's begin. What is the Old Testament? The Old Testament is one of the most influential compilations of documents ever produced by humanity, and indeed by beyond humanity, and it basically tells the story of the creation of the world according to religious tradition, all the way up into the events before the birth of Christ. So the timelines we're looking at are quite ancient, but hopefully we can make a little bit of sense out of it today. So this map here is an area called the Ancient Near East, and we have a couple of significant features. In this period of history, irrigation and water were absolutely essential. You needed water and irrigation to produce food, and that's where civilization could develop. In this area here we have the Euphrates and the Tigris. These are two major river systems, and the word Mesopotamia means between the rivers. Here in Egypt we have the Nile and the Nile Delta. Again, civilization developed along where people had access to water. This area here is often described as the Holy Land or the Promised Land. As you can see, it's a very important land bridge between Egypt and Asia and the Mediterranean. This area largely is desert, and if we connect up the river systems, we get what's called the Fertile Crescent, and this is where a lot of our history takes place. Today we can lay over a modern political map, and we get what we refer to as Greece, and we can see the borders of modern Israel, which was formed as a state in 1948. In the book of Genesis, we basically have the primeval history of the world. This is God creating the heavens of the earth and giving the world its form, and creating the animals and humans who would inhabit it. After the primeval history, we have the patriarchal history, and this starts with Abraham. Abraham is a good and righteous man, and God promises him. He makes this covenant: you will have descendants and your descendants will possess land, and that's the basis of the covenant between Abraham and God. Abraham has two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob. Jacob would be renamed Israel, and his 12 sons would become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. Speaking of which, now after the book of Exodus, we have the book of Genesis, we have the book of Exodus. Basically, the descendants of Abraham, the Israelite people, moved into Egypt to find food during a famine. And while they settled in Egypt, they were oppressed. They were forced to do harsh labor. And eventually Moses confronts Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." And we have the 10 plagues. Pharaoh doesn't want to let them go. but ultimately God frees the Israelite people, and we have this possible map of the path and the wanderings of the people throughout the wilderness for 40 years until they come to the sort of the edge of Canaan. Now Moses doesn't get to inhabit the Holy Land; he gets to look at it, but eventually he passes away, and Joshua leads the Israelite people and basically conquers all the lands of Canaan, which are then divided amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. If you've heard, Joshua led the battle of Jericho and the walls come tumbling down, there's Jericho. And this is one of the more challenging parts of the Old Testament for me. It's basically kill them all, show no mercy to anyone, the land is ours. Each of the 12 tribes gets an inheritance, and this map I found extremely helpful. While I was reading the Bible, it names all these places, and I have no idea where they are. This map makes them a lot more easy to understand. You'll notice that there are two areas allocated to Manasseh. Levi, one of the 12 patriarchs, he gets a special arrangement. The Levites, his descendants, will be the religious labor force. They're responsible for the maintenance and operation of the temple, preparing the Passover and other things of this nature. So instead of land, they get that special role within the community. And Manasseh is described as 2 half tribes. Here we have the united monarchy of Israel. So after Joshua and the Israelites have settled in Israel, we have the period of Judges, where everyone basically does their own thing. But eventually the Israelites say, we want a king, we want a king. God says, I thought I was your king. The Israelites say, we want a king. God warns them and says, this king will tax you, he will recruit warriors from you, he will get into strife, it will be a snare. People say we want a king anyway. So the prophet Samuel anoints Saul as king. Saul is tall and handsome, but not a very good king. He is replaced eventually with David. David is not tall, he is the least of his brothers, but he is extraordinarily faithful to God in almost all things, and is seen as the first true political leader of this state of Israel. David's son Solomon, famously, this was the height of Israelite prosperity. Solomon asked God for wisdom so he might be a great ruler, and that's the narrative that we get. Gold and silver are plentiful, there is peace, the house of the Lord, the temple is built, and everyone is happy. Eventually, though, we get a divided monarchy. There's a separation between the northern country of Israel and the southern country of Judah. These are separate political entities now, and it's worth noting that Jerusalem, the religious center of the Israelite worship, is in Judah, in the southern kingdom. Can we see it on this map? Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom. Eventually, though, in 722 BCE, the northern kingdom will be conquered by the Amorites. The Assyrians, my mistake. And then in 586 BCE, the southern kingdom of Judah will fall to the Babylonians, and the Israelite people are sent into exile to Babylon. A remnant is left behind, but the states are basically destroyed, and the people no longer have access to the temple for religious worship. So now I thought we might have a look at some timelines. Now, I and most mainstream Christian theologians agree that the Old Testament, particularly the primeval history and the patriarchs, are about theological truth rather than literal truth or an accurate historical record. But it does help to look at time periods to get a little bit of context around what's going on. So if we look at the patriarchal period, it basically begins with Abraham. Abraham is chosen by God as a wise and righteous man, and God initiates this relationship with Abraham. God tells Abraham that he's going to have children, but Sarah and he himself are very old, and they sort of laugh at this. How can it be possible? So Abraham has a son Ishmael with Sarah's slave girl Hagar, but then Sarah does have a child, Isaac, and we have that famous story. Isaac is the beloved son that Abraham thought he wouldn't have, and God asks him to perform human sacrifice, and while Abraham is willing to do it, God says, no, your faith is enough. Isaac then has two sons, Esau and Jacob. They're fraternal twins, but Esau is born first and therefore has the birthright. And then Jacob, assisted by his mother, basically deceives Esau out of his birthright twice, once for food and then the blessing after that as well. Jacob has 12 sons from his 2 wives and their 2 slave girls, who will become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes. Joseph is one of those sons, but the other brothers are jealous of Joseph. They sell him into slavery. But because Joseph is good and the Lord is with Joseph, he rises to prominence and success within Pharaoh's kingdom in Egypt. So again, as I mentioned, there's this a famine which Joseph prepares for. He has a dream, and God reveals to him that there will be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and Joseph prepares for it. He stores food in great quantities so that the people won't starve during the famine, and that's what brings the Israelite people into Egypt. They settle in Egypt, but ultimately they're oppressed. They're treated harshly and forced to work in very, very difficult conditions. God reveals himself to Moses and gives Moses, the instructions to lead the people out. We have the 10 plagues, which is basically a duel of wills between God and Pharaoh is likely the most powerful, human in the world at that point. And ultimately, the Israelites are liberated from Egypt. Then we have the Exodus, the period of Judges, which I mentioned. Then we have the United Monarchy. Samuel is a major prophet. He anoints Saul as the first king, but Saul isn't very good. David and Jonathan are close friends. There's a relationship there. And then Solomon, David's son, represents the height of Israelite prosperity and affluence. Then we have the divided monarchy period with Israel and Judah. Israel in the north is subjugated first, and then ultimately so is Judah as well. That takes them into the Babylonian exile. And again, these dates are approximate. There is some disagreement. It's not about literal truth, it's about theological truth, and how we might interpret and understand these events as divinely inspired text that we might learn religious truth from by studying. And then after the Babylonian exile, the Persians conquer the Babylonians and allow the Israelites to return to the land of Israel. However, Israel is not an independent political entity. It's a province within an empire. First the Persian Empire, and then the Hellenistic Empire, which we would call the Greeks, and then the Roman Empire. And that's the political situation at the end of the Old Testament. So I will show you an image straight from our classes, and this is the arrangement of books in the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Tanakh, and we get that name from the three words, the Torah, which are the first 5 books. This is the law or the teaching. We then have the Nevi'im, the prophets, which are divided into the former prophets and the latter prophets. Note that there are 12 of the latter prophets. And then we have the Ketuvim, which are the writings. In the Christian Old Testament, to which it's a very similar collection of books, but we add the New Testament, which includes the Gospel, to this. We have the Pentateuch, which corresponds to the Torah, the history books, the wisdom, the major prophets and the minor prophets. And in the Christian Old Testament, we put the prophets at the end because they foretell of the coming of a Redeemer for Israel. They set up the anticipation of the gospel that will be fulfilled. So I thought we'd have a quick look at the text. Now, there are several translations of the Old Testament. The Masoretic text is written in Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. I don't speak or read Hebrew, but this is just fascinating for me to look at. And I just thought we'd have a quick look. This language, to me, it's very organized. We have lots of square shapes, and I think that looks quite pleasing to me. So this is the book of Genesis, and the first thing you'll notice is that we go from right to left instead of left to right, and I do believe that the vowels are omitted. So we'll just take a quick look at the bottom here as we go through some of these words. So, in, beginning, created, God, object, the heavens, and object, the earth. And what I find absolutely fascinating, if we look at this word here, the word for God, Elohim, it's plural. So in the first sentence of the Bible, we sort of set up this idea of the triune God. And we'll look at this a bit more, but it's fascinating to come at this as from a Christian perspective. And the next sentence is, and the Spirit of God was on the waters. So we have this concept of God as plural, God as an entity that has multiple components. After the Masoretic text, we have the Septuagint. This is the Greek version of the Bible. Now, unfortunately, the Greek Old Testament was quite expensive. Accordance separates things into packages, and I've just got the basic ones plus New Revised Standard Version. But this is Matthew, which is obviously not Old Testament, but I thought it might be worth having a quick look at the Greek. And I can recognize some familiar letters there. I can see alpha, beta, tau, there's a lambda here. As a mathematician and as an engineer, some of that's familiar. So the Septuagint, often abbreviated by the Roman numeral 50, LXX, is the Greek translation, and the legend is that the work was done by 70 inspired scribe who would convert the Masoretic text into Greek. After the Masoretic text and Septuagint, we have the Latin Vulgate. Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire, and they needed a version that could be widely used. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the Latin to show to you, but the Latin Vulgate was widely used. After that, we have the English translations, of which King James Version is one, and New Revised Standard Version is one. And I'll just quickly show you. This right here is a copy of the New Revised Standard Version that my mother gave to me when I was very sick in hospital in 2007, and this is special to me. But you'll notice it says it includes the Apocrypha and Deuterocanonical books. These are books considered in the Catholic tradition to be canonical, that is, inspired by God and intended for religious instruction, whereas the Protestant traditions may not, in fact don't, acknowledge those books. So there is, even within Christianity, a little bit of disagreement about exactly what's canon. But I thought it would be interesting to compare these two versions, so the King James Version and the New Revised Standard Version. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. So, again, we have a slight difference in phrasing here, and that word, Spirit of God or mighty wind, can be translated in different ways. So I find that very, very interesting. And while we're looking at this, I thought we might just quickly peek at the book of John. John is obviously the New Testament. I'm biased towards the Gospel of John. I really like it. So I'll just read this first sentence to you. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I think that really shows a nice little connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament, which inspires my modern Christian faith. Something else I thought we might look at is how we interpret Old Testament and Scripture. And one of the things that we looked at was the world of the text, the world in front of the text, and the world behind the text. So the world of the text are the people, events, and places described in the Scripture. The world in front of the text, well, that's you and me, the people who are reading and interpreting this. And the world behind the text is the historical background and traditions that have been preserved and that we can analyze. And as an example of this, I chose for my exegesis Psalm 42. Psalm 42, I might just read some of this for you. As a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul. How I would go with the throng and lead them in procession to the house of God, with glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping festival. So that's a sample of the poetry that we find in the Old Testament, and Hebrew poetry is quite beautiful. We have a lot of parallelisms. We have something called chiastic structure, which is A, B, B, A, and we have metaphor. And as I did my exegesis, basically look at this text, learn about it, research it, interpret it. I found it was surprisingly deep, how far you could go. And one thing I would like to bring up, so actually two things. So, sons of Korah. If we have a look at Korah, might not show us. I was hoping the the Bible dictionary might pop up. Never mind. But Korah, he led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron, and he was punished. He and his followers were swallowed up by the earth. So while Korah was punished and the whole rebellion was basically wiped out, a remnant survived. And this is one of the sort of running themes in the Old Testament, that people will be disobedient, people will be rebellious, people will be wrong, and there is certainly consequences, but a remnant survives to go on to be renewed, to fulfill the promises. And I take hope in that. I think when many of us go through difficult periods in our lives, when I was in the hospital, we have hope that something will survive to go on. So by looking at who the text is written to, sons of Korah, we, who the text is written for, might interpret something out of that. So I look at this and it looks like it's intended for the remnant of a people. And I did find a very interesting paper called 42 Songs for Elohim, and I just wanted to show you that. This is an academic paper, and its basic argument is that within the book of Psalms we have an Elohistic Psalter, a group of psalms that is organized according to the number 2 and using the term Elohim for God. We talked about Elohim at the start of the Masoretic text. It is distinct from what we call the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, which is the Jewish covenantal name of God revealed to Moses. It's not to be used lightly. But as I was doing my exegesis, I found this very, very interesting. And if we look at the commentary associated with Psalm 42, Psalm 43, if we go down just a bit further, is clearly a continuation of the same psalm. It has a refrain in it that is absolutely identical. And if you notice in the commentary, these two psalms are certainly one, and we cannot tell why they were divided. Well, my explanation is that they were trying to achieve a particular number of psalms. If we look at the start of the Gospel of Matthew, we get the genealogy of Jesus, and it is 3 sets of 14 generations, which add up to 42. So there's 42 generations between Abraham and Jesus. 42. So that's a significant number. And I think, we've got 41 Psalms, we want 42. What do we do here? Let's just split one in half so we can have that numerological component to it. And what I thought I'd also show you is a bit of the interesting analysis we can do. Again, so in the exegesis, the number 42 is significant, and the use of Elohim for the name of God over the Tetragrammaton is significant. If we search for God, and then we do a little bit of analytics. So this is basically a frequency chart of how many words. And I'll zoom in, and we can see within the book of Psalms, from 42 to 83, this area, from here to here, we can see a definite spike, a higher number of use of the word Elohim for the word God. So that was basically one of the arguments in my exegesis, that the number 42 and the use of the word Elohim for God was significant to the compilers of the Old Testament. And that's what motivated them to arrange the Psalms in that way. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you found this interesting and educational. I certainly enjoyed exploring. I'm not sponsored by Accordance, but hey, Accordance, if you wanted to give me the Latin and the Greek versions, I'd love to explore them and send some business your way. Thanks for listening. Bless you. Have a wonderful day.